Carry on. Okay, sorry about that. So yeah, welcome everyone to this online panel discussion. We're here to focus on the case of Abdulrahman al-Sadhan, Saudi humanitarian worker, sentenced to 20 years in prison on the 5th of April by the Saudi terror court for his peaceful online activism. His case is not isolated, as we know, but takes place within a broad crackdown in Saudi Arabia on peaceful dissent that has taken place over many years and which has escalated in recent years under the ascent of the de facto ruler Mohammed bin Salman. This can be seen looking at the number of prisoners of conscience in Saudi prisons, and just in recent weeks we've seen a number of human rights activists sentenced to lengthy prison sentences, such as Nasima al-Sadhan, Mohammed al-Rabi'a, Khalid al-Omir. And this event, focusing on the case of Abdulrahman al-Sadhan, who has just days left to appeal his 20-year sentence, takes place on the same day where a global day of action is being held to call for his release. And we've seen vigils take place outside embassies in London, in Dublin, where an Irish TD delivered a letter written by Arij al-Sadhan, the sister of Abdulrahman, to the Saudi embassy in Dublin, as well as vigils in London and Berlin, and I think in Washington as well as online action, including under the hashtags Free Sadhan, 30 days for Sadhan, as he has 30 days to appeal his verdict, as well as the hashtag Stand with Saudi Heroes, and highlighting other cases of Saudi activists and peaceful critics sentenced to long prison sentences. With me here to discuss the case of Abdulrahman further, I could not wish for a better panel. With me is Arij al-Sadhan, the sister of Abdulrahman, as well as Abdullah al-Auda, the research director at Democracy for the Arab World Now, Bethany al-Haydari, the Saudi desk officer at the Freedom Initiative, Brian Dooley, a senior advisor at Human Rights First, as well as Ines Osman, the director of MENA Rights Group. So we will first hear from each of the panelists with a sort of introductory remarks, and then we'll go into more of a discussion after that. So to start with, Arij, if I go to you first, you have advocated tirelessly for your brother's case since his disappearance in 2018, so 3 years of turmoil. Now, following his sentence last month, and with days left for him to appeal, if you could just give us a brief summary of his case up until now, and sort of tell us where we are at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josh, and thank you so much for Al-Qasd and everyone who really took part and helped in putting this event together, and signing the letter with me, and all the amazing effort to call for justice and freedom and for improving human rights. The case of Abdulrahman, my brother, it's been going on right now for over 3 years. It's just tremendous injustice. Like you mentioned, he'd been disappeared for nearly 3 years. The first 2 years we haven't heard anything from him. Not until 2 years we got 1 minute call, followed by another year of disappearance. Then we got another phone call, which sounded promising, but shortly after it changed quickly into a quick and unjust secret trial. Basically, the court, the special criminal court, where it ended with him being sentenced to 20 years, followed by 20 years imprisonment, followed by 20 years of travel ban. The court session only took 1 month. They were 3 of them. My father couldn't attend. My brother was handed the charges, which was basically vague and baseless charges on the first hearing. The first hearing, my father wasn't there. There was no legal representative at all at that day, and on another day also, there was no legal representative or my father attending, and that was when the public prosecutors were challenging the defense that the lawyer have submitted. So the whole process is a sham trial. It's nothing but it's just completely all illegal. To this point, we cannot speak to my brother or see him. My father, who is a legal representative as well, he cannot speak to my brother or see him, even though he should be right now preparing with him for the appeal. So we're solely just counting on the court-appointed lawyer, without any family communication, without my father being involved directly with my brother, without any contact with my brother. So now we have only a few days left before the appeal due date to challenge this sentencing. So that's in general like a very short summary of the entire this ordeal of injustice.
Okay, thanks very much, Arij, for sharing that, which is just the most recent updates. But of course, this the ordeal has been gone on for 3 long years and has included the most severe violations throughout that. And just to clarify then, ahead of Abdulrahman's appeal, which is on the 5th of May, what's the current status of this? And if you haven't heard from Abdulrahman, is this appeal going to go forwards?
Yes, we're working right now with the lawyer to get the appeal response submitted. So hopefully in the next couple of days, it's going to be filed to the court. We'll see how it goes from there, because I mean, if my father is not talking to my brother, is not seeing my brother, it's clearly completely controlled by the authorities. So we cannot really tell or predict what is going to happen afterwards. Clearly, it's completely controlled. There is no fairness. There is no real justice going on. It's just completely sham from the beginning to the end. And as you know, it's all based on the charges, all based on a satirical Twitter account. So all he's being charged of is there's no evidence at all of what they're claiming. It's all based on a parody Twitter account that is critical of the Saudi government's repression. So it's just a glaring injustice. 20 years imprisonment followed by 20 years of travel ban. That means that my parents are going to be deprived from seeing my brother. Especially my mom is not going to ever be able to see my brother. I mean, it's unrealistic. After she's 100 years old, that's when she get to see her son. I mean, it's just absurd and mad. Just to deal with this ongoing injustice. And to add to that, obviously my brother is not the only one. This been systematic going on with several other human rights activists. What is also really shocking is that these recent long sentences have been increasing in the recent past few weeks, especially after the Khashoggi report came out and MBS wasn't included in the sanction list. It seems there is without real accountability. That means he can just carry on with more human rights abuses, which we are witnessing right now. And what we saw with my brother is just a glaring evidence of that. There is more repression going on in the country, more people getting long sentences, and there's added to that other human rights violations going on in the country. And as you've mentioned earlier, there are other cases. For example, Muhammad al-Atabi, Muhammad al-Rabi'a, Muhammad al-Qahtani, Walid Abu al-Khair is facing also long sentences, 15, 17 years old. There are other people who are still being disappeared. They were disappeared at the same time as my brother. Just to name a few, Turki al-Jasser is one of them. He's a Saudi journalist. Another journalist, a Yemeni journalist, is Marwan al-Maraisi. He'd been disappeared since 2018. And all of them having really difficulty to contact their families. So obviously there's repeated injustice among the Saudi voices in general. There are also other women rights activists who are still being, behind bars and disappeared for long periods. Just to name a few is Samra Badawi and Nasima Sada and many out there. So just to give you a short picture, like of the increasing injustice, increasing human rights violations going on in the kingdom, and we need the international community, we need the international voices to basically condemn these human rights abuses. Otherwise, it will just be carried out without impunity. So we really need everyone's voices, international communities, world leaders, governments, to condemn these human rights abuses.
Sure, thanks very much, Arij, for that, and a powerful remark at the end of the need for accountability in the international community to condemn these violations. We'll come back to you, but for the meantime, we'll go to Bethany Al-Haidari, the Saudi desk officer at the Freedom Initiative, a Washington-based NGO, and who has faced firsthand the repression of the Saudi authorities with a custody battle over her daughter, which thankfully was successful recently. Bethany, having worked closely on Abdulrahman's case yourself, as well as many other Saudi detainees, what are some of the main reflections and things that have struck you with the case?
Thank you, and thanks again just for having me here today to speak, and to Arij for her tireless advocacy on her brother's case. A couple things that I think are really important to note when we're talking about these cases, as Arij has already mentioned. The Specialized Criminal Court, which is the court where so many of the dissidents have been having these unfair trials, is not an impartial court. It is not a fair court. The Special Rapporteur, the UN Special Rapporteur, Ben Emerson, made a trip to Saudi Arabia to examine the Specialized Criminal Court in 2018, and he found some really concerning patterns and concluded that it failed to meet the minimum requirements of due process. So I think a lot of times when we look at these sentences, we have to recognize first and foremost the problematic nature of the courts which it's being held in. And these courts, rely on laws which hold that peaceful dissent or any form of criticism or any contact with anybody in the past who's been critical of the Saudi government can classify someone as a terrorist. Even in Lujain al-Hathlul's case, fighting against the male guardianship system could make you a terrorist, or supporting feminism could make you a terrorist. Tweets can make you a terrorist. So essentially, I think anybody who's participating on this panel or anybody who's tuning into this panel has crimes within this jurisdiction that could consider them a terrorist. So that's outrageous. Peaceful dissent is not terrorism. And what we're seeing within her case, thankfully, she had fantastic representation in California from Speaker Pelosi and also from her senators that really worked with State Department to support her family and take action on his case. So we were able to kind of engage with the Saudi authorities on this, but unfortunately their responses have been incredibly disappointing and degrading. Speaker Pelosi, who really stood up for human rights in this case, was just attacked by Saudi trolls online. Some of the offices were harassed even by the Saudi embassy in DC, given misinformation about this case. But this is a pattern. It's a pattern of harassment of dissidents, and it's happening throughout the United States. Arij is based in California, but we work with so many other families of American citizens, and their family members are wrongfully detained abroad. And I think what is positive is that people are starting to take action, regardless of if someone is holding a US citizenship or not. But unfortunately, we see a distinction in that the Saudi regime seems empowered to make these outrageous sentencings against people who are not US citizens, and ones who hold a different citizenship are given lighter sentences. And that's been problematic, and it's indicative of the very biased nature of the judiciary. So we're hoping that during this appeal period, as we raise voices and as we continue to call out these injustices, that, you know, Abdulrahman, Sadhan, and all of these other prisoners of conscience will be released and freed, and these families will be eventually reunited.
Thanks very much, Bethany, and highlighting the politicized nature of these sentences really shows the importance of this international pressure at this moment. And you mentioned the recent steps, including the statement by the US Department and Speaker Nancy Pelosi. So maybe now I'll bring in Brian Dooley, a human rights activist and author and senior advisor at Human Rights Watch, who in this capacity has led work on countering the US retreat from global leadership on human rights. So thanks very much for being with us here, Brian. And President Biden famously vowed to reassess relations with Riyadh and prioritize human rights. What sense, 100 days into his term, do you get the sense that this has been the case so far? Sorry, Brian, you're on mute at the moment.
Very sorry, there we are. Thanks for inviting me to speak. I work for Human Rights First, not Human Rights Watch, Josh. In terms of Biden, he talked big generally about human rights during the campaign. Secretary Blinken has talked big since the administration started. There have been a few straws in the wind in terms of improvements, but on the big calls, I think the jury is out at best. For instance, in allowing, given the go-ahead to arms deals to go to the Gulf, to the UAE, and to Egypt. I know that we're talking about this case in the context of a legal process and appeals, but really it's I don't think it's the law that is going to unlock this case. This is a political case. It's going to be a political process which eventually leads to his release. And this is a big test of the Biden administration. I mean, Biden has said that he is determined to recalculate and redefine the relationship with Saudi. And that's not easy to do, in fairness to him, and it can't be done overnight. There are some big, powerful forces who will resist that, not least the Pentagon, not least those members of Congress who have jobs in their states and in their districts for members of Congress who rely on those weapons contracts with Saudi. But calling publicly and repeatedly and properly, not the sort of tepid statements come out of the State Department so far, but really elevating this and making a big deal about it publicly doesn't cost any job. It doesn't cost the US government any money. And really, this is a first, and I think pretty easy test for Biden and the administration to pass. And so if they fail on this, I think that it's a very poor signal for what's likely to happen over the coming years. It's not going to cost them anything to make a big fuss publicly about this and the other cases. I think it's going to be a hard slog to get the American government to do anything. I mean, the experience of working on these cases of trying to get people out of prison in the Gulf, whether it's Saudi or the UAE or Bahrain, the US government does eventually shift, but it takes a colossal amount of work to get them off their asses to do much, frankly. Now, it can be done. And it's good to see that Nancy Pelosi's office is vocal on this. I think they need to be much more persistently vocal on this. I think from what I've seen over the last 10 years, that those prisoners who have some connection to the US, there are buttons to be pressed there, whether they're citizens or not. So, of course, actually, it's better if they're a citizen, but if they're not, if they've been educated, like Abdulrahman has been in the US, that can be a useful lever. In the cases, for instance, of Mariam al-Khawaja, Zainab al-Khawaja, who were both in prison in Bahrain, Ruda al-Safar, who was also in prison in Bahrain, they had also all been to university in the US, but weren't US citizens. And we managed to use those connections to get the universities to reach to the relevant senators and members of Congress and to call directly and publicly for the release. I think it's those sorts of avenues which are going to have to be pushed. As I say, it takes a lot of effort. I've heard a couple of people already describe Arij's advocacy as tireless. I'm sure it's not tireless. I'm sure she's bloody exhausted most of the time. And I'm afraid that, it's likely to take even more effort, but it can be done. It doesn't always work. Mohammed al-Qahtani is in prison in Saudi, sentenced to 10 years. He went to university in the US, in Indiana, and his family are US citizens, but the US really hasn't bothered to do much about him publicly. Ahmed Mansour went to university in Colorado. Nasser bin Ghaith, also in prison in the Emirates, went to university in the US in Ohio. So it doesn't always work, but really pushing and pushing and pushing persistently. Is no point the US doing anything behind closed doors. Don't be fobbed off. If somebody from the State Department or a member of Congress says it's better to have these conversations in private, it's not. I've never seen that work. The only thing I've ever seen work in terms of getting political prisoners released from the Gulf is high volume, persistent effort. But don't underestimate how much effort it takes. Look at that colossal campaign that Lujane's family had to mount to get her a conditional release. So I'm not ultimately pessimistic, but I've seen before it takes a lot of effort to make these things shift. I worked with the Al-Darat family, who also had strong connections in California when the father and son, Kamal and Mohammed, were in prison in the UAE for a year and a half or 2 years or so. Also were told the same old lies by the US government. It's best to keep quiet. Don't make a fuss. You'll make it worse if you get loud. Not true. It wasn't until the family got very loud, very vocal, that the US government really were forced into taking some public action, and eventually they were released. So I think hopefully this is going to be a short process, but I think the louder the process, the shorter it's going to be.
This working on the Saudi file and in the Gulf, and we'll come back to some of those points in a bit, but just to let other speakers get off the mark, Ines Osborne, the director and founder of MENA Rights Group, a Geneva-based legal and political NGO who has worked closely on Abdulrahman's case as well, including submitting his case to the UN mechanisms. And MENA Rights Group receive many different cases on Saudi Arabia and across the region. Ines, you must have documented and submitted many cases like Abdulrahman's involving torture, arbitrary arrests and disappearance. How would you sort of situate Abdulrahman's case within these other cases and the wider crackdown in Saudi Arabia?
Thank you, Josh. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, that's good.
Perfect. Well, thank you, first of all, for convening that very important and timely event. So I just want to say a few words in terms of why the case of Abdulrahman is especially emblematic today. It's really one of the few harshest sentences that we've seen. 20 years is a lot, and even the other human rights defenders or prisoners of conscience haven't been sentenced to such a heavy penalty. So that's also why we need to act, and it's really important that we do something about this case, and that the UN, other governments, and so on really try to push for that unjust sentencing to be overturned. I also want to highlight that today, Arij has mentioned that we've really seen an increased crackdown on human rights defenders over the past few months, with a couple of defenders who've had their sentences increased or who were actually sentenced to a heavy penalty. But I just want to highlight that this has been really allowed by a very heavy and restrictive legal framework that has been in place for the past few years. And Abdulrahman was actually sentenced under the cybercrime law, but also the counterterrorism law that was amended in 2017. And this really has allowed to pretty much, Bethany has mentioned it, to pretty much prosecute anyone as a terrorist for merely expressing their opinion. So I just want to highlight, because I think the Saudi authorities are really good at, let's say, giving a pretense of legality. And I think also that's why the trial of Abdulrahman, which was a bit surprising, you know, after 3 years of disappearance, all of a sudden he's brought to court. And I think this is all, at the end of the day, aimed at giving a pretense of legality. However, the mere existence of a legal basis is not enough for a detention to be grounded in law. So if you look, for example, at the definition of terrorism, it's pretty much any act intended to disturb the public order, undermine public security. Even criticism of the ruling family is considered a terrorist act today. And so these very laws fall short of international standards, and it pretty much means that any detention on the basis of these laws is also arbitrary, and that includes obviously Abdulrahman, but the many others that are currently in prison. And it also additionally creates a climate where people don't know if it can land you in prison. As Bethany said, all of us would probably qualify for prosecution in Saudi Arabia for what we're doing right now. So the case of Abdulrahman and of all the other prisoners of conscience need to be understood from that perspective. And I also really want to highlight that we not only owe it to Abdulrahman to try to do something, but we also owe it to the family, obviously to Arij, but to the many others, families of people who've been unjustly imprisoned, because what they endure really on a daily basis is a form of torture. And yes, we have the victims and the people who are in prison, but I think also on behalf of those who are relentlessly fighting for them, we owe them to do something.
Thanks very much, Ines, and many powerful points there, including the form of torture for not only Abdulrahman but all of his family, which I think has been highlighted, for instance, with the online trolls and abuse that Nancy Pelosi and the US State Department rep got after tweeting about Abdulrahman, which you only have to imagine would be 1,000 times worse for Arij and his relatives themselves. We'll come back to some of those points in a bit, but lastly, we will go to Abdullah Al-Auda, the Gulf researcher at Democracy for the Arab World Now, or Dawn, and the son of detained cleric Salman Al-Auda. Abdullah, sorry to leave you to the end, but you've heard from several speakers. Maybe I'll just give you the floor, and we'll be delighted to hear your insights on this case and the other points discussed.
Thank you, Josh, and thank you for thank you for Al-Qasd and all the sponsors of the event. The case of Abdulrahman is a case where it shows you the actually farce of justice in Saudi Arabia. The whole process has been, from the very beginning, has been actually really sad, and it just lacks the basic elements of legal and fair proceedings. He has been detained now for more than 3 years. He has been without contact for 2 years and something. He had been held for a very long time in solitary confinement. He has been tortured, electrocuted, and then after all of this, he has been transferred to the specialized criminal court, which is like basically a terrorism court, in which they charged him with very vague, as Arij mentioned many times, very vague and broad language kind of charges, and then he was convicted and sentenced to 20-year imprisonment. This is just based on an account, alleged account on Twitter that is completely satirical in nature. It has said it in the profile itself. It's obvious from the picture. It's obvious from the language. It's all there, but nonetheless, it did not prevent the government from sentence him to all this. And I want to highlight how the lack of accountability in Khashoggi and lack of accountability actually led the Saudi government to be such brazen. And I think they were emboldened by us and the U.S. administration and others letting the Saudi government get away with the murder of Khashoggi. I think so they thought, well, if they just not gonna convict us or sanction us over the murder of Khashoggi, they're not gonna do anything over any other case for that matter. So that's just a case of accountability. I think if we need to, if the U.S. administration wants to recalibrate and wants to prioritize human rights, the Saudi government would have dealt with this and so many other cases much differently. They would have understood the priority of the U.S. government. They would know there will be consequences for any human rights violation in Saudi Arabia. But guess what? I mean, now the Saudi government is still doing what has been doing. It actually went further. In MBS's Saudi Crown Prince's interview the day before yesterday, I think, or the day before, on a national TV, on a Saudi national TV, he is pledging to kill dissidents on national TV. And because this was an embarrassment to propagandists here in Washington, D.C., they chose actually not to translate that part, which we did in our part. It's a huge, actually, statement coming from MBS, who was just actually, the report was, the ODNI report was so much obvious in pointing fingers to him, in ordering or killing the late journalist Jamal Khashoggi, rahimahullah. It just shows you the persistence, how MBS is thinking right now. He's not just saying that what happened was just a mistake and we're going to fix this. He's saying that we are in the future, for the foreseeable future, are going to go after dissidents and kill them. And this has been justified religiously. And he cited a hadith that he actually phrased in his own agenda and in his own context. So he gave it that religious justification. He is willing and determined to actually go after dissidents and kill them. And he even said this, like, kill them. It's like with a sword. He's imagining a sword and killing dissidents. This is what you get actually when you are, free from accountability. And I think the case of al-Sadhan is just a victim of this environment of letting MBS off the hook. I think when we want to recalibrate when the U.S. administration wants to recalibrate the relationship with the Saudis, with the Saudi government, they should start with accountability. Thank you, Josh.
Okay, thanks a lot, Abdullah. And emphasizing the importance of accountability and how this interlinks with the developments on the ground is this sort of back and forth sort of calculation between the authorities and the international community in terms of what they feel they can perhaps get away with. And emphasizing that the case of Abdulrahman, as well as others, is a real litmus test of the Saudi authorities' intentions. So maybe to open it up a little bit now, thanks all very much for your interventions. We discussed a little bit some of the advocacy steps around Abdulrahman's case, such as the statement by Nancy Pelosi and the State Department. But just thinking more broadly as well, what are perhaps some of the other pressure points and avenues to explore that could make a difference in increasing the pressure around Abdulrahman's release and other prisoners of conscience in Saudi Arabia? I'll open that up to whoever wishes to reply.
Okay, let me start. I think. Again, coming back to the U.S. administration, they just have shown that they can make a difference. In the case of Walid Fitahi, in the case of Salah al-Haidar, in the case of Badr al-Ibrahim, in the case of Lujain al-Hudlul, they just have shown clearly that the U.S. administration, they have that power, they have that influence, they have that leverage over the Saudi government, and they can use it. Again, it falls on their shoulder to do more, and just to show that that they have that pattern and approach toward human rights, basically, and that's just that's just logic.
Okay, thanks very much for that. Maybe going to you, Bethany. You've worked on other cases of Saudi dual citizens, US Saudi citizens who have been released on bail but still facing trial. To what extent have these American channels of pressure been effective in those cases, and what more could be done to bring about more sustained changes, like full releases and the dropping of charges and other prisoners?
Thanks for that. I think that the United States obviously has, of any country within the world, the most amount of leverage over the Saudi government. I think that while it's fantastic that there are congressional offices that are speaking out and there is private action going beyond between State Department and the Saudi authorities, at the end of the day, what has to happen is policy changes, legislative changes, things that have teeth and that create consequences. One thing I do want to kind of applaud and celebrate is Rep. Connolly's bill, the Protection of Saudi Dissidents Act. Rep. Connolly notably had Jamal Khashoggi as his constituent, as well as Aziz al-Yusuf and Salah al-Haidar. Rep. Connolly and Senator Kaine tirelessly advocated on their cases. And I think the Protection of Saudi Dissidents Act just passed the House recently with overwhelming support, bipartisan support. And it requires a certification before weapons sales are made to Saudi Arabia that no dissidents are being harassed, that nobody's being tortured in detention, and that any U.S. citizens, to ensure that no U.S. citizens or their family members are wrongfully detained or being prohibited from exiting the country. So it addresses the travel ban issue. Now, I'm hoping that Senate will take that up, but I think that this is the sort of thing that makes realities on the ground happen. We can't change Saudi law. And we're not, the United States is not supposed to go in and interfere directly. That's completely not what we're asking for, but we are asking for accountability and pressure on a policy level and through the law to make them adjust and improve, and to ensure that these human rights atrocities no longer occur. So I think more bills and legislative support has to happen that leads to change on the ground in Saudi Arabia, and essentially protection. Because just like the Act notes, this inaction makes it a dangerous place, right, for anyone that's spoken out against Saudi Arabia, regardless of citizenship or nationality. Right now, we know that nobody anywhere in the world is safe. If the Saudi authorities want to target them and take them down, they will. So that has to change.
Okay, thanks, Bethany, and thanks for sharing about the Protection of Saudi Dissidents Act, which sounds like it could be very significant if it's passed, and with real implications, including around US arms sales, and with Biden's promise to review Saudi arms sales to Yemen, but then also seeming to be backstepping on this a little bit. Maybe Ines, maybe going now to the UN level. Last year we saw Saudi in a sort of landmark move voted off the Human Rights Council, or their application to be renewed was refused. Are there any other kind of avenues at the UN level or upcoming? I think the Saudi Universal Periodic Review is due at some point over the year. So what kind of developments are there in the pipeline that could make another channel of pressure at the UN level and elsewhere?
Yeah, so as you highlighted, Saudi Arabia was not re-elected to the Human Rights Council last year, which, to be frank, I think surprised a lot of civil society actors, because we were kind of expecting them to get a seat, because they had actually been on the council for 12 years and not much has been done, very little action has been taken by the Human Rights Council on Saudi so far. There's been 2 joint statements by groups of states in recent years condemning the crackdown on human rights defenders and peaceful dissenting voices. However, we have not yet seen a resolution by the Human Rights Council, which civil society has been pushing and urging states for a while. So maybe with Saudi Arabia not a member of the Human Rights Council anymore, that's something that we can hope and continue to push for in the future. But in my opinion, the Human Rights Council has really fallen short of its mission and not done enough when it comes to Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, I think special procedures have been particularly remarkable in trying to act on Saudi Arabia. We mentioned a couple of those. Bethany mentioned the visit of the former Special Rapporteur on Human Rights and Counterterrorism in 2017, and special procedures like the Special Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders, the former Special Rapporteur on Summary Executions. I think they've really done the best they could to the maximum of their ability and capacity. But unfortunately, ultimately, they lack teeth, as we were saying. And what we need to see is this climate of impunity to really stop. And I believe there are several options or avenues that can be envisaged, such as Magnitsky sanctions. There is now a new mechanism at the EU level. But I really believe that in order to move forward, we first, as Abdullah was saying, we need to also hold perpetrators accountable, because at the end of the day, what we've seen in the aftermath of the Khashoggi murder is not much, or way far from enough, in terms of response by other states. And I think it really sent a very strong signal to MBS and, the authorities in general, that they do get away with, murdering someone. And at the end of the day, I feel like it really gives them the opportunity to continue the crackdown, and for that crackdown to not go unnoticed. But yes, far from enough has been done, I think, by the international community to respond to that.
Okay, thanks a lot, Ines. Points us, some of those possible avenues to explore, and I guess it's not also one size or one solution, but there's multiple avenues. But I guess the theme of accountability certainly is very much the case. And I know Abdullah, feel free, other speakers also to jump in. But just to bring up Dawn's Magnitsky court case, obviously Dawn set up as the brainchild of Jamal Khashoggi, and has been key with several lawsuits in the US around accountability for Khashoggi. So to what extent is this an effective avenue in terms of fighting the impunity?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what we have been doing so far is to hold the perpetrators accountable, not just on the Khashoggi murder, but on human rights violations generally. One, through the legal avenue. I mean, we have the case against more than 20 people involved in the murder of Khashoggi, for example. It has been there. We filed the case back in September 2020, and we just actually were successful in doing the service process in a federal court in the US here. We actually also have been doing along with so many other organizations, including Freedom Initiative and also MENA Rights and other groups, the Magnitsky Act submissions, and we are doing one case this year. And also through pressure and talking to decision makers, and also other groups have been doing a great job on this front as well.
Okay, thanks very much, Abdullah, for sharing some of Dawn's initiatives, including in light of Khashoggi, as well as on many other cases. And Brian, to come back to you, beforehand talked about some of the sort of difference in kind of outcomes around some cases in the Gulf facing similar situations, long prison sentences and other abuses. And you pointed to, I guess, the scale of the pressure needed in these campaigns, such as around Loujain al-Hadlou and her family, which saw real significant international attention and pressure, but resulted in her temporary release, but very much conditional release. What kind of lessons or things can we draw from other cases in the region relating to Saudi, and how do you think we can perhaps highlight some of these long-standing cases? You mentioned Mohammed al-Qahtani and other Akbar members who have been in prison for years, and it seems every year that's passed, it becomes harder to really raise their profile and get attention around their case. So how would you go about trying to rekindle some of the long-standing cases in Saudi Arabia and elsewhere?
Sure, thank you. Well, I think to get back to the specifics of Abdulrahman's case, although I understand that he's part of a larger context, I think that the key to unlocking this, for better or worse, lies in Washington, much more than in Geneva or Brussels or London or anywhere else. And I think too that within Washington, I have rarely seen an administration, whether it's Trump or Obama. I mean, it's a bit early yet to judge Biden, although I'd probably include Biden in that also. I've never seen an administration move really with much on these sorts of issues without being pushed by Congress. Now, the good news there is that I think it's possible to get Congress to push the administration to push their violent dictator allies. The bad news is, as you've mentioned with Loujain and some of the other cases, it takes a lot of sustained effort. The problem, I think, with particularly some of the longer term cases is that there's a flurry of activity when the person is arrested, when they go through the sham trial process, and then maybe on an anniversary there's a bit more attention. But to keep sustained pressure to get the media interested year after year after year really is is a big challenge. It can be done, but you know, that's a lot of work for the family. It's a lot of work for NGOs to do. I mean, you know, I guess we've got savvier over the years in how to do it, but I think, you know, unless the Saudis realize that it's in their interest long term to let him out, let him out, probably on some deal where he goes to live in the US. Unless they realize that, you know, they ought to do that quickly, you know, we may be in for a longish haul on this. But we know some steps to take, you know, to get members of Congress to do those round robin letters, to get questions raised at the State Department daily briefings. Those things are back, and they are very useful in sustaining pressure, getting journalists to ask questions week after week. Why haven't you done more on this? What do you mean you're concerned? Like, what does that mean, State Department? And then it ratchets up to notch to, we're extremely concerned, and still the Saudis don't take any notice. And then they ratchet up to, we're hoping for due process, right? And then you go through that ridiculous stage before they finally call for the immediate and unconditional release, and then you can start talking a bit more seriously. So we've seen this path before. There's nothing rocket science about it, but you know, it's a lot of effort. There's a lot of resources, and I think it's just be in everybody's interest, including the Saudis, to, you know, cut to the last chapter straight away. But who knows? You know, maybe they've seen that sense. Maybe people in the Biden administration. I'm very skeptical about the quiet word behind closed doors, as I say. But maybe, you know, maybe somebody there has made Riyadh see sense that it's better for them to release him sooner rather than later. But if not, you know, we're ready for the struggle for as long as it takes. I mean, you know, you just can't walk away from these things after a little while. Say, sorry, mate, I got fed up after 6 months. I couldn't be bothered anymore. It's not how it works. We'll see it through to the end.
Okay, thanks very much for that, Brian. It seems like now, I guess, is a really critical point, which I guess the idea of this day of action and this event with Abdulrahman's appeal pending is that it's now a real critical time with the international attention on him to use all of these leverages of pressure to bring about his immediate release. Earlier this year, there was news that Abdulrahman was told on the telephone that he would be released, and then in a cruel twist, he was instead brought to trial, which I think underlines the cruelty of his case and many others. Maybe coming back to you now, Arij. Today there's a global day of action highlighting the case of your brother. We saw the US State Department statement. Hopefully other initiatives by other politicians. In Dublin, there was a TD, a member of parliament, who handed a letter written by yourself to the Saudi embassy. So hopefully that is read, and they know that people are asking about your brother. What do you see with these types of initiatives around your brother's case, and what message do you have for other politicians who may yet to have spoken out, or those who already have?
Yes, so like everyone else mentioned, the only option we have right now is to keep the pressure, and not just keep the pressure, but also increase the pressure, because this is a glaring injustice that is going on. And like you mentioned, my brother was told that he would be released, and I think that's also a message for us to kind of like keep us quiet. And at the same time, it's more a form of a psychological torture. And I've heard this also from other families where their detained relatives are told not to share details with them of torture, or not to like ask them not to be public, because they are told, if you stay quiet, we're going to release you. If you say what we want, we're going to release you. And this is what we're seeing with my brother. He is obviously under a lot of pressure to not to contact us at all. And even if during the few times that he saw my father at the court, he is under a lot of pressure not to share anything of what's going on with him. We know for sure that he is being tortured. My brother been tortured with electric shocks, with flogging, beating, signing confessions while blindfolded and under torture. And he's been also kept in solitary confinement for a long time. He's been completely deprived from any contact with us. Even during the court, he mentioned that he's having difficulty getting contact calls or visits from family. And all what the judge could say is maybe because of Corona. And when my brother mentioned, well, what about behind a glass or just through headphones? And then the judge basically said, well, we can consider having the lawyer allowing the lawyer to contact you. He never mentioned anything about the family, although the question was also about the family, why he cannot get contact with the family. So obviously there's a constant pressure to make sure that nothing no information comes out about what happens to these detainees. The amount of pressure and torture that they're going through is horrendous. In terms of my brother, he's being tortured and interrogated. So the interrogators and torturers are just walking in and out at any time, day and night. He's being sleep deprived. The amount of the torture and the pressure that one have to go through for entire 3 years, and then brought to a sham trial like that, on false promises that you're going to be released afterwards. You just have to say what we want. And then afterwards, he's struck with 20 years imprisonment, followed by 20 years travel ban. Obviously, this is not just a torture for the detainee himself, but it's a collective torture for the entire family, and also sending a harsh message to the entire community around the world that freedom of speech is not accepted in Saudi Arabia, and it's going to be faced with harsh punishment like that. So all we have right now is just to keep the pressure going and increase the pressure as long as we can. And this is not just from our end as relatives. It's a huge, of course, stress and effort on our end as relatives, but also, it's the international community. We need the human rights organizations around the world. We need the government officials around the world. And as an American citizen, definitely the U.S. government have a huge, effort and a huge, weight over here. They can influence. They can help in that case. Not to mention also my brother. My mom is an American citizen. She is being tortured by this. The least she should be allowed to talk to my brother whenever she wants, and she is being deprived from that. She is being deprived. Obviously, she's going to be deprived from seeing my brother for 40 years because in those circumstances we can't even visit Saudi Arabia. And as you know, if we go there, I'm probably going to be, I'm already probably on their terrorist list because I'm speaking out. So obviously there is, with all this injustice going on, we can't afford to be silent. We are all in danger, to be honest. We're dealing with a very dangerous regime who have no mercy. The only thing they believe in is, MBS believes in, is to kill dissidents. This is his idea of reform. Unfortunately, we're not seeing real reform. And the other thing is that the world should be careful about believing any reform promises. So far, what we've seen is fake outside reform by sport washing, and there's no actual reforms. So even when women driving was allowed, the same women who were activists for the women driving, they were tortured, they were imprisoned, they were sexually harassed. And even today, the few ones who got released, they're under very heavy restrictions. So they can't even, continue to be women rights activists anymore. So all these reform promises are false, are lies. They're not true. And what we've been seeing so far is nothing but sport washing to cover the actual human rights abuses that are happening and that are increasing on a daily basis. So definitely we need to keep the pressure, and we need to increase the pressure as long as it takes until we see actual improvement in human rights, and of course in our case until we see my brother free, and hopefully many other detainees and peaceful activists free.
Thanks very much, Arish, for that powerful call and for describing this collective punishment and torture that's been inflicted on you and your family. And nobody should have to go through what you have all been through. And we applaud your advocacy. We're getting towards the end. So if anyone has any final sort of remarks, now would be a good time. I'm recalled of the video that Abdullah you shared about MBS from his interview this week, where he I think referenced a supposed part of the hadith that justifies the killing of dissidents or extremists, as he describes it. I mean, what does this tell us over 2 years on from the Jamal Khashoggi murder about the state of accountability and how MBS sort of sees his position at the moment?
It's a question for me?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, that was Abdullah. Just to expand upon on the video that you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, sure. It's absolutely tragic to see after all this, after the Khashoggi and after the outcry of the whole world over the killing and what has been exposed of human rights violations in Saudi Arabia. Now the Saudi Crown Prince still has the audacity not to deny, by the way, human rights violations or try to cover them up as he used to, but actually to go ahead with them, to be determined, and also to give it that kind of religious clothing that the Saudi government has been always doing to, commit human rights violations. It's just ridiculous and outrageous to see how we can see this and just stay silent. It's preposterous to see the same guy who just has been, evidently shown that he ordered the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, is saying on national TV that he is obligated religiously to kill his own citizens. This is just, outrageous, and it's just actually a test for all of us what to do with such a statement. It's a really dangerous statement. It's actually an ISIS style that actually succeeded in ruling the government of Saudi Arabia. I mean, just imagine if any other individual in any part of this world said anything remotely close to what MBS has said, and how the world will react. But because MBS, he is on top of the oil barrels, and he's has a lot of billions. He can buy. He can actually go ahead with transactions and arms sales. He will always be tolerated, and the damage will be mitigated by his allies and people and propagandists and people who still support him around the world. But it's dangerous. I mean this pattern, this language, this rhetoric has shown in the past 3 years that it is serious about doing damage to the whole world. They reached out to Canada, tried to assassinate Omar Abdulaziz, tried to assassinate Zaid al-Jabri. They reached out to Norway. They tried to assassinate Iyad al-Baghdadi. They reached out to Turkey. They assassinated Jamal Khashoggi. and the whole world watched that. They reached out to UAE and abducted Lujan al-Hudhul from there. They reached out to Jordan. They abducted Fahd al-Btayri from there, and they reached out to Cairo. I mean, the whole world basically is a theater for their own, for their butched operations. If not stopped, they will not just continue. They will, I mean, do more, because they have been emboldened by by the world's reaction, basically.
Okay, thanks a lot, Abdullah, for putting that into context and underlying some of the things we've discussed today. We will draw to a close now, I think, and if anyone has any final comments, then please feel free to share. I think Arija's call around her brother's case and the importance of now, with his appeal date pending, for stakeholders and international community to really speak forcibly and actively around his case, and a reminder that today there is a day of action around Abdulrahman and other Saudi activists facing lengthy prison sentences. So I encourage viewers to engage online and elsewhere, including the hashtags #FreeSadhan and 30 days for Sadhan, as he had 30 days to appeal his ruling. And I would like to thank all of you once again, to Arij, Abdullah, Bethany, Ines, and Brian. Thank you very much for your interventions and powerful calls. And thank you to all of our viewers for watching, and to the supporting organizations, MENA Rights Group, Freedom Initiative, and Dawn Democracy for the Arab World Now. So without, on that note, I will say goodbye and thank you all very much.
Thank you.